Good morning. Thank you for this presentation and also for your invitation. I have to say that I don't have a good English language, so I speak slowly, but I don't understand when you speak quickly. So if you have questions, you have to speak, if possible, very slowly. Thank you. So it is a history from Marseille, because in France there is not only Paris, there is also Marseille, which was a very important city for the study of epilepsy due to the presence of Professor Gaston, who was very interested in this discipline, and he created a very specialized center, the Centre Saint-Paul, which is not in the hospitals, but it was an institution created not only by him, but also by another doctor, who was Dr. Joseph Roger, a neurologist, and a woman who was Mrs. Germaine Poinceau-Chapuis. She was a political woman. She has been Minister of the Health in France, and she was now at this time in Marseille, and she had in charge all the medico-social problems in the city. And she also had a son with epilepsy. And she was particularly interested in epilepsy and in helping the children and their families and the doctors to better know this disease and better treat this disease. And at this time in France, there were very few centers specialized for epilepsy. And so this center was very original, because there were the medical departments with EEG registration, neuroimaging. At this time, there were neither scanner, CT scan, neither IRM, but there was arteriography and pneumoencephalography. And there was a team of psychologists, there was a social assistant, and there were small houses in a park for 50 children with epilepsy who remained in this center for observation and treatment. And they were cared by educators, special educators. They had school. And there was also a small unit for hospitalization of children with their mother. That was extremely new in medicine, to have the mother with the child during the hospitalization. So it was a very, very interesting center. And Professor Guasteau was a researcher also, and he had many students who went from different parts of Europe and United States and other countries to study with his collaborators. And before I was studying pediatrics in the hospitals, University Hospital in Marseille, and I was contacted by one of the doctors who worked with Professor Gaston to make my medical thesis on a topic which was new at this time. Professor Gaston would like to study children who presented with a type of epilepsy known in the USA but not in Europe. It was named at this time epilepsy with petit-mal variant, because petit-mal variant means this epilepsy resembled to the petit-mal epilepsy but was different, so variant of petit-mal. And we studied together 50 children who were recorded in this center. And I made my thesis, and we named this epilepsy the Lennox syndrome, because the American doctor who studied this type of epilepsy for the first time was William Lennox, a very great epileptologist, American epileptologist. And Professor Gaston organized every year a colloquium, international colloquium with many doctors. And in one of these colloquium, he presented our work. And he explained, he had named it after the name of Lennox. But in this colloquium, there was the Lennox's daughter, Mrs. Margaret Lennox. And she said, yes, my father, it was the origin of this epilepsy, but you have studied it very deeply and you have known this epilepsy better. So I proposed to name it Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And so I was very involved in this epilepsy because I worked with Professor Gastaut for the individualization of this syndrome. And the work was published in the International Review Epilepsia. And after that, I became a resident in this center. So I followed 50 children, and I followed also the consultations by the different doctors, Professor Gastaut, Dr. Roger, and others. And like that, I learned more on epilepsy. And we had different researches, such as the study of the absences in the petit mal epilepsy, which is no more named like that. And we studied the spike wave discharge associated with another type of absence, which are the myoclonic absences. They're different. Then we studied also the new drug benzodiazepines, and we individualized particularly the clonazepam as a very strong anti-epileptic drug. And after that, Professor Gastaut became the chief of the University Hospital unit for electroencephalography, and the central sample was directed by Dr. Roger, who has died last year. And one of his collaborators was an Italian doctor, Professor Tassinari, and I worked also with Tassinari and Dr. Roger. We continue our study about the absences, and we were also interested in other forms of epilepsy, such as progressive myoclonus epilepsies. And we have studied one form of epilepsy, which was named at this time Ramsay syndrome in France. But now it has a different name. It is the Unverricht-Lundborg syndrome, and we studied also the Lafora disease and other myoclonic epilepsies. So we were interested in the myoclonic epilepsies. And after some years, in 1978, I proposed to individualize a group of children with epilepsy with myoclonia, who were not included in these other epilepsies we have studied before. And I have published a small paper in French. Then we had other discoveries. We have also described an interaction between carbamazepine, Tegretol, and special type of antibiotics, which were the macrolides. And now everybody knows that we don't give Tegretol when a patient has this antibiotic, or the contrary. If a patient is with Tegretol, we have to be cautious and not treat him with this type of antibiotic. And we describe also another type of myoclonic epilepsy, which was benign. Now it is named as a myoclonic epilepsy in infancy. And we organized with Professor Gastaut, the first international workshop in Marseille in order to put some order in the different types of childhood epilepsies. And in this first international workshop, Professor Gastaut went to be the president, but the organization was by Dr. Roger. And after this workshop, we published the first book, which is named The Study of the Epileptic Syndromes in Infancy, Childhood, and Adolescence. And this book was also the basis for the new classification of epilepsies in 1989. And from this time, you can see we have published other editions of this book, and it has been translated also in Chinese and in Japanese and other languages. And the last edition has been published last year in English, and it is more complete. So it was a continuous work on epilepsy in this center. Then we had another doctor who went from Italy after Tassinari, who was Renzo Guerini. Some of yours, I think, know this doctor who has been in different meetings with the Ideal League Association in the USA. And so in this picture, we can see when we were younger. And the other is a Mexican doctor, this one, and Guerini, and myself. And we published other studies. For example, the idiopathic photosensitive occipital lobe epilepsy and the epileptic negative myoclonus. Myoclonus was always our interest. And I had other students. Here we can see Vietnam, from Vietnam. Here from Germany. Here from Turkey. Here from Mexico. And here from Italy. And this woman is one of my latest students, but now she is very well trained. She is a good pediatric neurologist, and I work with her in Roma, in Italy. And that is an example of how we work in St. Paul. We had regularly meetings of the staff, but they were very informal. We can see here around this table with Dr. Roger, who is very, comment on peut dire, extraverti, and all the other doctors. I would like to underline this doctor, René Soulerol, because we had the chance to have this doctor. He was a psychiatrist, but he was also an epileptologist, and he has been very, very interested in epilepsy. He knew very well the psychiatric problems, the psychological problems of the children with epilepsy, and it was really interesting to work with him. And he wrote a book about the child with epilepsy. He has named it in French, L'enfant foudroyé. As we can see that in English, I don't know if you can translate. The child, la foudre, during the temporal, the thunderbird, something like that. Very, very interesting book. And unfortunately, he died also some months ago. The discovery of this epilepsy. So, as I explained before, I live in this center. Excuse me. No. I lived here, in this house, in the park, and there were the different small houses of the children around. And in this part, there was the school. And I could see the children, the school, and also a place to play on when they didn't go to school. So I could see all the children who walked on this way to come from the school to their houses. And on this way, there were many stones, small stones. And in Marseille, there is sun very often. And I remarked particularly one small girl who walked looking at these stones and with myoclonic jerks. And the educatrice held her by hand to avoid, he felt, because these contemplations of these small patterns provoked myoclonic seizures. That was an observation. And I observed there were many other children who were sent to us for a difficult to treat epilepsy with more or less mental retardation, but they were sent with the name of Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, because the other doctors didn't know the different types of epilepsy, and every child with a very severe epilepsy and resistant to drug, he was a Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. But observing all these children every day, I could observe they were not all Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And there was this group of small children who were different from Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And I propose, we discuss every week in the staff, in the meeting of the staff, we discuss these cases. And every week I explain the history of a new child. In the first year, he had convulsion with fever and other without fever, and he was normal, but after he became retarded. And, the history was always the same. So it became clear it was something particular. And we have named it in French, Epilepsie myoclonique sévère du nourrisson. And that is the article we have published at this time. On this diagram, you can see my colleague Michel Bureau, who was in charge of the EEGs, and my other colleague, Dalla Bernardina, another Italian, who went with us. And at the same time, in his department in Italy, he also observed the same children with the same characteristics. And in the International Congress in Kyoto in 1981, we published our first cases, and we had at this time already 42 patients with this type of epilepsy, only in Marseille, without the Italian cases. And it has been published in this book of the proceedings of the Congress. And in the following years, there were several studies by different groups in different countries, Italy, Japan, France, Germany, USA, Argentina, using intensively video polygraphic EEG. At this time, it was the beginning of this technique, and the syndrome was better delineated. And these experiences were compared during the Marseille workshops, because after the first workshop, we organized other workshops, and lead to the classification, so proposed by the ILE, first in 1985 and after in 1989. And the so-called myoclonic epilepsies were no more considered as a group of different epilepsies, but they are classified according to the same criteria as the other seizure types, epilepsy types. And we define this epilepsy at this time with the following criteria: onset before 1 year, by severe convulsive seizures, first febrile, then without fever, then myoclonia. We stressed the importance of the myoclonia, atypical absences, focal seizures, and slowing down in psychomotor development, but normal neuroimaging. The outcome was that seizure was very pharmacoresistant. They had repeated status epilepticus, photosensitivity, as it is not easy to see that, but it is here we have a myoclonic jerk during photostimulation, and mental handicap in many of them. So it was an encephalopathy, but without known etiology. And it was different from the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, and for this reason, to differentiate it from the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, we named severe myoclonic epilepsy, because in the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, the main criteria is the tonic seizure and drop attacks, and the tonic seizure during night, and the slow spike wave on the EEG, and that is not observed in the Dravet syndrome. I can show you one video of one of the first little girls we have recorded. Here we have the EEG and the polygraphic recording. These channels are the muscles, deltoid muscles. And we can see there are many, many movements. That is a myoclonic jerk. And she has like a tremor, very small parcellar myoclonias. She is constantly agitated with this small myoclonia. And she is very hyperactive, and she is photosensitive. Here we have stimulation, and here the myoclonic jerks provoked by the stimulation. And that is another example. This girl is 5 years old. She is Germano French. The mother is French, the father is French, the mother is German. So at this time, she could speak German and French. Not completely, but she had relatively good development. But she has something particular.
Das kann man nicht sehen in der Kamera. Du musst mal auf die Kugel.
Look at the eyes.
Une boule jaune, oui. Une rouge.
She knows the colors.
Une bleue.
She has closed the eyes.
Ouais. Une verte.
Her eyes.
Une boule verte. Ça c'est vert, tout à fait.
Another time. And after this closure of the eyes, she changed activity. Because this closure of the eyes is accompanied by a spike wave on the EEG. And now we can see in another video of the same girl. Look at the eye. She closes the eye and she has a myoclonic fit. Okay. That is an example of the drawings realized by patients with this epilepsy at 17 and 15 years. They have a good representation of the body, but you can see the graphism is very, very uncertain. But they know how to do. But they have motor problems. That is also a part of the disease, the motor problems. You know there are the atypical forms, but these forms were described later on. Now I prefer to name them not atypical but incomplete, because in every disease out of the epilepsies, there are the complete forms and the incomplete forms. They are not atypical, they are a part of the disease, but without all the symptoms. For example, without myoclonia, but also without atypical absences, or without focal seizures, or with febrile seizures which are rare, not frequent during the first year. And the second thing we have observed along the years is the persistency of this symptomatology in adulthood. So it was no more justified to name that myoclonic and infancy. And so for this reason, the name has been changed, and it became a Dravet syndrome, because the specialized doctors in the commission did not find another name more appropriate. Okay, and after that arrives the molecular genetic time. That has been very, very important, and we have progressed a lot in the knowledge of all the epilepsies, and particularly of this epilepsy, because of the possibility to study the genetic background of these epilepsies. And in 2001, in Belgium, Claes and his colleagues discovered a new mutations in the sodium channel SCN1A. In 7 children they have studied, all at this time, all carried this mutation. That was in 2001. From this time, many, many other studies have been realized, and now, presently, we know that 70 to 80% of the patients with Dravet syndrome carry one mutation. But there is a small group without this mutation, and the studies continue. That is a picture taken in another workshop, which was organized by Professor Delgado Escueta. You can see him here, who is an American epileptologist, very interested also in the myoclonic epilepsies. So he organized this workshop in Seattle in 2002. You can see here my colleague Michel Bureau, Professor Guerini, Professor Marco Medina from Honduras, who has studied also with us in Marseille, and my new colleague, he arrived after the history of the severe myoclonic epilepsy, but he is not new, Dr. Janton, Pierre Janton. And now, after all these years and very numerous studies, we speak about the Dravet syndrome spectrum. because there was an explosive development of molecular genetics and studies of the mutations involving the ionic channels, particularly SCN1A, but not only, also other channels. And these studies, the researches are performed all over the world, particularly in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, and in Australia. Most important in Australia also, because we were the first to discover the channelopathy in the syndrome with generalized epilepsy and febrile seizure plus, which is now named not generalized, because after the first description, they discovered there were also focal epilepsy, so it is a genetic epilepsy with febrile seizure plus. And in these epilepsies, the members of the families carried on mutations in one sodic channel, but it was not, the SCN1A was present, but not very frequently. They had more other types of mutation, particularly the GABA-ARG2 mutation. And after this study in Belgium, we had this discovery by Claes of the SCN1A in the severe myoclonic epilepsy. But it has been also discovered that other clinical forms of epilepsies with mutations of these genes existed, and they are the group of the channelopathies. And other mutations were found in Dravet syndrome, but they remain rare. The majority of the patients have the SCN1A mutation, but some patients can have SCN1A, or we know now that there are surely modifier genes. So not only this mutation, but also other genes we can have an action on this mutation, and we name them modifier genes. And for example, the SCN9A is a modifier gene of the mutation in Dravet syndrome. And there are also other epilepsies due to SCN1A mutations, related or not related to Dravet syndrome. And sometimes it is difficult to have accurate diagnosis to define if it is really Dravet syndrome or it is something which resembles Dravet syndrome, but it's not exactly Dravet syndrome. And among this group, there was also another mutation which was discovered in France and in Australia, the famous PCDAC19. And this mutation is found only in girls. So if a girl who seems to have a Dravet syndrome, but it is not absolutely characteristic, typical, and we don't find the SN1A mutation, we have to look for the PCDAC19, because there are chances she had this mutation. It is a group with another type of mutation, but which is very close to the Dravet syndrome. So the situation has become more complicated, more complex. Okay, in order to know, to give insight on this group of studies, we have organized with my Italian colleagues a workshop in 2009 in Verona, in Italy, because as I don't work more in France, in Marseille, it was difficult for me to organize in Marseille, so we organized in Italy. And many researchers and doctors came in this workshop from different parts of the world. And as at this time there were also family associations, we invited also the International Family Association, and that was the first time we worked with the family association. It has been, the proceeding has been published in a supplement of Epilepsy. So that is another important development in the knowledge of the disease, is the social aspect of the disease and the emergence of these international associations who have, or families who have a child affected by Dravet syndrome, or now by Dravet syndrome spectrum, not only Dravet syndrome. First, it was named International Dravet Epilepsy Action League, IDEAL League. And later, they changed the name for Dravet.org. And there are more than 700 families coming from Americas, North and South, but from Europe and other countries in the world. And now there are also other associations in several countries. I know those in Europe, probably there are others, I don't know, in UK, in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Switzerland, now in Canada, and also in USA, different from the International League. And the European Association met last year in the London Congress for establishing a project to have a European Federation of the associations. Here we have some picture of children. He's French, he's Italian, she is also Italian. She is a girl of 15 years now. She's very nice, very sweet. She's always smiles. She has a very good contact, but she does not read, she does not write, she is not autonomous. But she is happy. And here is a young patient from Argentina I received in my home in Marseille, and that is a picture sent by his mother. In conclusion, I would like to underline one important thing in my opinion. One child with Dravet syndrome is a person with his own characteristics and his own prognosis. We cannot mix all the patients. They have the basis of the same symptomatology, but every child is different from the other. And for example, one great difference is that in the response to drugs, I am surprised by the number of different results we have with the same drugs in these different children. So one family who had a very good result with an association with clobazam and stiripentol and valproate cannot say in the other children this association will be also the best association. That is very important, and we have to work more to try to understand these differences, particularly in the response to drugs. And at the end, I thank you. I thank the associations who help patients, families, but also doctors, and stimulate research. Because you bring to us your information and your way of living with these children, and that is important for us to try to better understand and to better study to have better results. Thank you.